No country ever asked to be colonized.
I'm about to step on that barge behind me.
It's never been clear how much big government does matter.
Hey there, welcome to Your World by Bloomberg QuickTake. I'm Jennifer in New York.
And I'm Kurumi in Tokyo. One of the ongoing stories of 2020 has been nations reckoning with race and history.
And one museum in Belgium is trying to reconcile its colonial past with a modern world being shaped by the Black Lives Matter movement.
I'm stood outside the Royal Museum for Central Africa, a controversial museum as it was founded by King Leopold II, whose brutal reign in the Congo helped fill this museum behind me. It's since tried to change its image, and in light of the Black Lives Matter movement has taken particular pertinence because of its varied history and colonial past.
Clearly, our museum has played a major role in serving as an instrument for colonial propaganda. For more than 100 years, we've spread messages on stereotypes from Africa and on superiority of white cultures over black cultures. Entire generations of Belgians got their first encounter with Africa here in this museum, so an entire generation of Belgium have been fed with the message of stereotypes and of white superiority. So we acknowledge that we are part of the problem and that we've supported efforts to institute racism in the Belgian society.
Despite never having been there, King Leopold II ruled in the Congo Free State with an iron fist, mutilating and often cutting off the hands of the workers who disobeyed. It was around this lake that in the 1890s he brought over 267 Congolese to exhibit in a human zoo as part of a great exhibition. And in almost 100 years after, the museum stood as a colonial bastion of Belgium's rule in the Congo. In 2013, it underwent a renovation that was completed in 2018 to help modernise it, but there still remains controversy around the exhibits that are shown.
The African Museum is a reproduction of what they used to have before that, where they talked about the colonized story of Belgium, Congo, with a proud voice, where I think that they do need to change that, and they didn't, to tell a story about what they did and the atrocity that they actually went on in Congo while it was colonized by Leopold II.
We are very critical of the colonial message. We believe that colonialism is a system of governments based on military occupation, on exploitation of a country, and on racist and authoritarian rule. No country ever asked to be colonized, so we take distance of that. We now take a positive view. But to come back to the Black Lives Matter, we acknowledge entirely there's a strong link between colonialism, imperialism, and racism in Western societies.
And a museum like this can help the people in the good way to get a more understanding about the history and also about the Congolese people here, especially in Brussels, to understand their statements and everything.
The Rhine is one of the largest rivers in Europe. It's also dealing with low water levels and rocks jutting from below its surface that make freight more dangerous. Elisa Mibach took us along for a ride down the river.
It's early morning here at the Rhine in Koblenz, and I'm about to step on that barge behind me. The ships here have to face low water levels repeatedly in summer and autumn, and we're going to go through the rockiest bit of the Rhine, and we'll see how the captain will go through the rocks at low water levels. So we are now in Germany's UNESCO World Heritage Mid-Rhine Valley, and the beautiful rocks you can see in the back are also underneath the water level. We are now approaching the famous Lorelei rocks, and the legend goes that in the olden days the ships have crashed here because of the treacherous rocks. And the rocks in these areas are now going to be scraped off by the government, and they also want to subsidize low-level water boats. And the transport minister has even said he wants to look at building locks on the Rhine.
Ja, wir fahren jetzt hier gerade Niederheimbach, Lorsch Niederheimbach, und das ist im gesamten Mittelrheintal die gefährlichste Stelle. Hier ist nur die oberste Schicht vom Grund Kies, darunter ist dann gleich Fels. Wenn wir hier Grundberührung haben, kann das unter Umständen schnell zu einem Riss im Schiff führen, und das wäre fatal. Also ich persönlich bin ganz klar für weitere Schleusen auf dem Rhein, für eine weitere Kanalisierung. Für uns als Unternehmer wäre das natürlich von enormem Vorteil, bessere Planbarkeit. Allerdings sind die ökologischen Folgen für uns nicht abzusehen, weshalb ich nicht weiß, ob das im Endeffekt wirklich für alle das Beste wäre.
But locks on the Rhine are a tricky question. It's a debate that has been going on for decades. And the Environment Ministry said to me in an interview there's no way that a new lock is going to be built on the Rhine. And the environmentalists in Germany are also pretty much against it. We're now at the end of our trip for today. We've been on the ship for 8 hours, and we have gone through the rocky bits, and everything has gone well.
This smart mask is not intended to perform any medical function. So a regular mask, right, what you can buy off the shelf, the same functionality is what this mask can also do. The only thing is it can actually monitor and indicate to you if it's not effective. So it's not adding more safety mechanisms to stop the virus from attacking you or bacteria from attacking you. That's the purpose of the simple mask, but it's to show when the effectiveness of the mask is there and when it's not.
From soccer moms to NASCAR dads, each election cycle promises a new demographic that will influence the outcome of the race. For 2020, Bloomberg News identified 9 of these groups. This week, we're going to show you how the pandemic has swayed the so-called Coronavoters.
It's been a long, slow, arduous process to recovery, but one that we attack every day with a lot of gratitude for the result, because it hasn't turned out that way for over 175,000 other families. And that's not something that we take lightly whatsoever. I did not vote in 2016, which was by no means unique among my demographic and age group, but is a decision that I quickly regretted and have come to more in the past 4 years, as the current leadership has affected me and my family more and more intimately. Around the end of March, different members of my family started feeling unwell with symptoms that were consistent with the virus. And my dad, it hit him hardest, and he just never really turned the corner and got better. He was prescribed hydroxychloroquine. After starting to take that drug, he didn't sleep for 3 days in a row. His heart was racing. He had shortness of breath. By the 4th day, we were rushing him to the hospital, and he was having a heart attack. And we think it was in large part due to the prescription and application of that drug. He remained in ICU for almost the entire month of April, during which my mom, sisters, and I lived phone call to phone call, checking in with his nurses and doctors. What it ended up doing the trick for my dad was a plasma exchange They basically recycled his plasma with fresh plasma. It wasn't plasma with somebody with antibodies. So he managed to come home around the end of April, and since then has been going to physical therapy every day, in which he's essentially had to learn how to walk again. Every physical function atrophied while he was in bed for a month.
The thing that's lost on the general public as it relates to the virus is that as a survivor, most of my trauma is physical. I'm trying to pick up the pieces of who I was physically. Our son Grant, my wife Kelly, and our daughters Chandler and Cameron experienced the emotional trauma of almost losing me several times.
It was incredibly difficult to watch press conferences every day.
The frontline workers, many are taking it. I happen to be taking it.
Hydroxychloroquine?
I'm taking it, hydroxychloroquine.
When?
Right now, yeah.
And we had to sit and watch him talk about the drug that might have killed my father in that sort of offhand manner.
My situation was more dire than we can even articulate. And it's caused us as a family to fight through that emotion together. But it's also caused us to look at our country and the world in a much different way.
The current administration's response to the pandemic and my own family's experience with COVID has only cemented my resolve to participate politically. In 2016, a big reason that I didn't vote was because of my skepticism over how much big government matters and how much it affects me. It's never been clear how much big government does matter, how much competent leadership from the top down can be at times of life or death importance.
I don't think that the virus was a political agenda, but it certainly has been politicized. It's difficult to have a positive perspective toward the decisions that this administration made.
Would $1,000 convince you to take a coronavirus vaccine? Earlier this week, I spoke with an economist who believes paying people might be the only way to get the economy back up and running.
The title of your op-ed is called Want Herd Immunity, Pay People to Take the Vaccine. Can you just tell us first, when and how did this idea even come to you?
Well, it was early to mid-August, and my wife and I were both thinking about the outcome of the election and whether that would have any influence on people's willingness to take the vaccine. I did a back-of-the-envelope calculation based on Dr. Michael Osterholm's scientific finding that roughly 60% of the population needs to have immunity in order for the country to have herd immunity. And I knew that vaccines were not going to be perfectly effective, and so I did some research, found that Dr. Fauci optimistically projected that a vaccine would only be 75% effective. Holy cow, the country is so politically divided. How are we going to get to 80%? The only other answer that came to me is, well, if we don't get to the magic 80, and by the way, the number could be higher or lower depending on what assumptions you make. The only way to cross that bridge is to actually pay people to take the vaccine.
Tell us about this $1,000 number.
I just did a simple thought experiment to myself. I said, if I were a person who was nervous about taking the vaccine, would $100 change my mind? I didn't think so. If it's $1,000 as a family of four, that means you're getting $4,000. The right number could be higher or lower, but you just can't go out and ask people. As a practical matter, we're going to have to shoot in the dark if we go to something like this. I argue in the piece that we actually ought to err on the high side, because if you start low and then try to raise it later, people will know that in advance and they won't take the vaccine at the beginning. They'll just wait for the price to go up. There are going to be some people that are so anti-vax that you couldn't pay them enough. But you don't need everybody, because if the national target is 80%, that means 20% don't have to take it, and you can still reach this goal. We will not get our life back to normal until we reach herd immunity and the vaccine actually dies down. There's a large group of people who will not need the $1,000 to take a vaccine. Giving these people $1,000 in effect is a waste. You can't politically say to people, I'm only going to give the $1,000 to people who were previously hesitant and now are going to change their mind. You have to give it to everyone. It's a price of our political polarization to say that we're going to have to pay everyone, regardless of their inclination to take the vaccine. in order to reach the national target.
Do you think it's too early to be having this conversation about potentially paying people? If not, why is now a time to have this conversation?
It takes a while for ideas to percolate and then find their ways into legislation. This is not the kind of thing you can slip into a bill at the last minute. This is a complicated idea. It could cost something like $265 billion. So when you're talking about an expensive program like this, which still I think is a bargain because we get our country back and save trillions of dollars in the process, it's obviously too early to offer it to people because we don't have the vaccine yet and we don't have Dr. Fauci saying, yes, you ought to take it. I just want people to seriously think about it and for policymakers to think about it. I would not run this experiment, so to speak, until someone like Dr. Fauci has actually blessed the vaccine, ideally even gone on TV and shown that he's getting a shot. Because right now, the FDA's credibility has been severely damaged by the insistence by President Trump that we're going to have the vaccine before the election season.
Why do you think it's so important for this idea that you're proposing to happen at this time?
Well, because the costs, both human and economic, of this particular virus have been devastating. And the longer this drags on, the more Main Street disappears. If we want our country back, if people want to go to sporting events, we've got to get to herd immunity. Unless, by the way, there's a magic improvement in therapeutics. And so it's so important, given the costs of what we've incurred and are going to incur, that we ought to really start laying out plans for what we're going to do to get to the goal.
Your life, and not only just your life, your legs, something that you need to move around and move forward in life, can be taken from you like this, man. Please, I'm telling you, change our lives out there. We can stick together, make some money, make everything easier for our people out here, man, because there's so much time that has been wasted.
The NBA playoffs are still underway, and while the Milwaukee Bucks are no longer a part of the championship conversation, their moves off the court in response to the Jacob Blake shooting may put them in the history books for a completely different reason.
It was the 4-day boycott heard round the world. A few days after a black man, Jacob Blake, was shot in the back 7 times by a white police officer in Kenosha, Wisconsin, the Milwaukee Bucks refused to take the floor in their playoff game against the Orlando Magic. Kenosha is less than an hour away from Milwaukee, and the Bucks, a team with a legitimate chance to win an NBA title, were going to forfeit the game as a way of protesting the shooting. The Magic decided to boycott the game as well. 2 later games were also canceled that night as the teams involved joined the protest. The women of the WNBA joined in. So did Major League Soccer. So did Major League Baseball. Eventually, so did Major League Hockey. The age of the activist athlete was undeniably upon us. But here's the important thing. The NBA didn't stop there. They wanted to do more than simply hold a symbolic walkout. In the locker room, the Bucks got Wisconsin's Lieutenant Governor and Attorney General on the phone. They made it clear they wanted a plan of action, tangible steps they could take. It was suggested that they come out publicly in favor of a police reform bill that had been proposed by Wisconsin's governor. And that's what they did. In the ensuing days, the players met among themselves, with league officials and with the union leadership. LeBron James called Barack Obama for advice. The league and the union released a joint statement listing a handful of new initiatives. They're insisting on ads in every playoff game that deal with civic engagement. And the teams have promised to try to use their arenas as polling places on November 3rd. You used to be able to count on one hand the athletes like Muhammad Ali or Kareem Abdul-Jabbar who were willing to speak out about injustice and racism. Now entire leagues are doing so. That's progress.
That's our show for this week. Thanks as always for watching, and remember to follow Bloomberg QuickTake on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube.
And for a daily recap of the day's top stories, visit www.quicktake.video. Thanks for watching.